Welcome, sales professionals, those new to or advancing from a sales associate role, or even if you are a peak performance professional and you are just coming back to grab hold of something. I know that we've also got sales team leaders that are tuning into this to see what they might be able to glean and share with their salespeople, or more importantly, just to see what their salespeople could be looking at. Just a reminder, people, you are at liberty to recommend that anyone that you know that is in the sales profession to jump on board, subscribe to these webinars each week. And, you know, so that I don't care who comes on, who enjoys it. It's not free. It's free. There's no cost associated with it. And we'll always leave you with a few really good gems that you can do something with almost instantaneously. Also, if you would have a look on YouTube, or if you can't find it, just simply send me an email, mark@salestrainer.com.au, and I can send you a link. If you do subscribe to that YouTube channel, all of the recordings of a lot of training that we're doing now are posted up there, and we'll put you in. And if you do subscribe, you can jump on during the premieres. I think they're going to be fairly fascinating, because any questions or interaction that you have, because I'm watching it with you, I can give you commentary, and I'd love to have you jump on board. So coincidentally, we have one right after this presentation that's coming on as it relates to price, and I thoroughly recommend you have a look at it. So on with the show we go. So the title we're up to, this is traction. So this is about you've already broken the market, you have listings, you're looking to create traction, leveraging from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, and so on, and developing your skills primarily in the role of listing presentations, making sure that you are not only procuring listings, you're getting hold of every listing that you want to get under the right terms and conditions. And I'm fresh off a lot of training, direct training that I've been doing this morning for our team over there in New Zealand. I know a couple of you are on here right now again, and well done for that, which started coincidentally in the very small hours of this morning before dawn for me to jump on board, because they've jumped ahead with daylight savings a week ahead. But the subject matter today at session 11, I've titled it Pandemonium, as there's a bit of pandemonium in the market on the back of the pandemic, and just how you should be wrestling. I mean, let's face it, we are at the space or the time of year where traditionally a lot of properties are coming on the market down here in the Southern Hemisphere in the early stages of spring, ahead of summer. And a lot of people will be thinking it. Now, as we come out and lots of active property sellers are now, some of these lockdown constraints are being lifted. I know that in some states you haven't really experienced it. We're joined here today by some people that are over in Western Australia. And certainly they've been the oasis for some of the football codes. And, you know, I'm told that things are relatively normal over there, albeit that from afar there is some effect. But of course, we've also had situations, you know, I was actually talking to one agent in New Zealand where their restrictions are being lifted in the area they're in, but they're out of Auckland. And because the restrictions still exist in Auckland, there are sellers that are kind of reluctant to put their property on because they want to take advantage of the Auckland buyers being able to come through. And I think the same would exist for those that are maybe making the migration from as far as Victoria, moving up to the Queensland market. There is some spaced effect. Either way, it is all starting to lift. We're seeing a lot of the vax stuff come off, couple that with the time of year with the market. And one has to ask the question, how do we, in all this pandemonium, take control, get our productivity up, really engage the continuity of sellers on leverage? So it's that thing that I've always been banging on about. How do you actually turn that one listing into two, two into four, and start to significantly grow your market share, get those opportunities, get those presentations that effectively should be an education, and then move into that space where you remove this chaotic situation and move, and if you are taking notes right now, move from a reactive disposition into one of proactive disposition. Yep. So let's just get this all into play. So the first thing I want to just cover off is on the what we've been doing with our people at Property Careers. I think this has still got relevance, especially in the prospecting sphere. So just a rewind there. A couple of weeks ago, we focused on the orientation, and this is a reminder for those of you that are doing your own prospecting, or you might be engaging with someone. The orientation of your prospecting needs to be completely, I guess, segregated from what you might be seeing with agents. If you take the time in an empathetic disposition to look at it from the seller's point of view at present, with what's going on with COVID, with everything that's going on with migration and being able to move around the country, you can understand why they might be reluctant to progress with their plans on selling. This is exasperated even further when agents, because we are approaching these sellers and we want to get listings on board and we're trying to deal with all these lockdown issues, but our orientation is about getting to the listing presentation. And I've said this a couple of times. You should make your orientation around prospecting one where you are seeking presentations by invitation rather than by solicitation. Now, I'm not saying that you don't want to get those active property sellers on board, but do understand it's a matter of timing, and take the time to understand that it's not just about identifying them going in for the wham bam. This, I believe, is relatively off-putting. I don't mean not be there. You need to be what I've always referred to as omnipresent. You need to be around. You need to be available. You need to let them know that you are ready to do the job and get that information to them. But you don't want to be ringing them to the point of badgering them. And I'm always reluctant to share this with salespeople because sometimes we hear what I've just said then and we go, I won't call them. I don't mean that. So I'm saying that nothing replaces the personal contact. And if I was to put this in perspective for you guys as real estate professionals, I can almost tell you that your productivity is going to have a direct correlation to the conversations that you have on a daily basis. And if there was ever a message that I wanted to deliver to salespeople, it would simply be this. Ensure, for me, it would be somewhere around 10. You might think that's a little bit over the top, but I would, if you basically want to be doing roughly anywhere from 4 to as many as half a dozen listings a month, you're basically going to need to do somewhere in the order of 10 to 12 listing presentations. To secure 10 to 12 listing presentations, you're going to have, I would have thought, at least 5 conversations a day. And you're going to need to build what I refer to as an active property seller list. And this needs to be your focus of somewhere in the order of 20 to maybe 30 active property sellers that you've identified, and be regularly in communication, having conversations with them. Now, you want to tamper that amount of conversation that you're having. So some of them are going to be of the ilk where you want to be speaking to them, I guess, once a week. And to do that, there has to be some source of contact and connection that creates a platform for you to engage good conversation around that. So what I've said is, in your passive contacts, and we follow this up, this is just a reiteration, and we did the same with the guys inside, those sales associates working inside Property Careers Prospector School. First up, send them The moment you've made that connection, your property seller's research guide. Of course, if you meet them at an open for inspection and you're using that as a qualification tool, they already have it. And you can send that along. Having said that, if you've given them a hard copy of the property seller's research guide, I would then be sending them the soft copy, the electronic version of the property seller's research guide as a confirmation. From there, immediately move them into the SMS router. So you've qualified them, you've made it about centric to the motive, you're talking and discussing the motive. We've now sent the property seller's research guide out. We've put them on the SMS list. We're making sure that they're receiving advice of property sales that you're making in real time right throughout your agency. You don't want to, you want to tamper this again. You only want it to happen maybe twice a week, every 72 hours at an absolute maximum. Third one is, this was the big change that we spoke of last week. You send them a comparative market analysis without you giving any opinion as to where you think it sits with price. This is giving them good information. It is platforming for good conversation in and around what they might be doing. From there, we then move to the Market Roundup. So we're coming up to that space. It's the first of the new month. In the next week or so, you want to make sure that you get them your version of your company's, your office's newsletter. We call it a Market Roundup. I like to keep those relatively lean. It has a few pieces of information in it. One is we tell them how the market is, which answers that question. And when most people ask, how is the market? It then goes, so you do that in less than 100 words if you possibly can. You then give them a whole run of sales, probably around 15. So if you have to use some from the previous month or, you know, going back as long as 3 months, that's fine. But a good cross section of sales, and then some testimonials, recommendations, or as we call them, accolades built into that single page, short and sweet piece of communication that goes out. Then you want to be sending them your accolades, information, or in by way of what we refer to as case studies, some good stuff around marketing. And the case studies are all important. If you can show them information that readily quantifies the fact that you have taken people inside all of the, for want of a better explanation, pandemonium around this pandemic and being able to successfully move people, you need to get that into strong communication and get it in front of them in terms of case studies. Couple with this, examples of the marketing product that you utilized in there, how it was packaged up, what success it's having. Again, all the feedback that the sellers may have given about your service and how it worked. And if you can show how you're getting around it, and this is happening with great regularity, you've moved from, you got your orientation right, you've made a real solid connection with them, and now you're empathizing strongly with them, then the whole thing's going to glue together. And this is how you see your way through. The other thing that we talked about with our sales associates, and one that you ought to be mindful of as a sales professional, was making the conversations when talking always centric to the motive. So first up, where are you coming from? Where are you moving to? And make it about a balance of 20% of where you're coming from, but more importantly, pushing it at where you're coming to. And then keeping the conversation about building a strong rapport. So we talked about the motive and understanding that it's about, you know, what or where they're trying to go and do, then searching for it on the why would you want to do that, going down through the layers and eventually getting to that final component of a motive. When does this have to be done by? And the more they start to divulge, you'll find that they'll start to then ask for advice, and the opportunities will come, especially if you're sending this passive information. And of course, you're engaging good conversation around the motive and the procurement of it. Then you simply make sure that the subject matter when you are talking to these active property sellers is centric to, first up, we already talked about it, the motive. Secondly, that it's discussion that is specifically about the property itself. Their property is what I'm talking about, because of course at the front end of the motive, you're talking about where they're moving to. And then last, the final subject matter is about the client. just refrain from any discussions about yourself. If they ask questions about you or your interests, what you're doing, your family, whatever, answer these, but then drive the topic of conversation back toward the motive, the property, and the client, because you want to open this particular client to engage you on subject matter which is specifically pertains to them. The more they talk about themselves, the more that rapport is built in a positive manner, the more you'll find that they like you because you are listening. I said this very, very clearly to our guys at Property Careers and Sales. I said, basically, you know, you've got two ears and one mouth. Use them in those proportion. I say the very same thing to you guys. Make sure that you are using those proportionately and to your advantage. All right, so then we move from there and we dig even deeper about then. See, once you've actually creating that relationship, you can move comfortably into the pre-sell. So I've got examples of this. You know, I've got Courtney Fern, who's up there with Lincoln Tatnall, and I've just said to her very clearly, make sure that you get these CMAs out and you're engaging all these people. And this is where the real twist comes in. This is a Courtney works with Lincoln Tatnall. He's one of our real estate rock stars, a peak performance professional doing very high numbers. And for that, to keep that continuity up, they have to focus on the APS. So when we move, the APS being the active property sellers, this is important. Now, I want to move down into that space and explain. So with, you know, here at as sales trainers, a sales professional, how do you come out of this pandemonium and start to increase your productivity and move that ahead progressively so that you can take market share with the degree of permanency? Well, you just have to start doing a couple of very distinct things. So we did talk initially about platforming a couple of weeks ago, and I said that make sure that the platform by which you are running your presentation is consistent to that which you are sending out inside the Property Sellers Research Guide. And we know the distinctions that we make inside the Property Sellers Research Guide are basically about making, you know, motive more centric than price. We make it very clear in the opening part of the Property Sellers Research Guide that the comparative value is just subjective. It's just a matter of opinion. This kind of vindicates you, especially if you send the right cover letter in that prospecting out with a comparative market analysis as step 3 in your passive contact. And you say, look, I'm just giving you this information. This is to empower you to arrive at your own conclusions of where it sits comparatively. However, when the market property comes to market, the only way we can gauge market value is by taking the property to market, and market value is what you're going to receive. So this becomes important in that we make that platform is always about motive, and this is engaging them on a different level. Of course, we then explain the value of variables and how they fit in, and then set up that moment where we say that agent selection, you should be reviewing agents on their professional capacity as marketers, as negotiators, and indeed as communicators. Again, we concede very simplistically that finding a buyer is the easy part, but getting that buyer to part with their individual maximum amount of money requires us to create a value parameter around that. So these are the questions you need to ask yourself inside your listing presentation. When you are presenting marketing, are you presenting this as an investment? Are you making it clear that marketing, utilizing it in terms of advertising, is very one-dimensional? Try to stay away inside your presentation of suggesting to a seller that you know, you need to invest in marketing to produce more buyers, which is going to create competition. To be honest with you, it's a misnomer. It's a bit of an absurdity. One of the things I'm constantly saying to the owners of property, hang on. You keep talking about wanting to get more buyers. How many of these have you got to sell? And they say, well, just this one. I said, well, so it sounds to me like we just need one buyer. More importantly, we need the buyer that sees the value that we need to satisfy your motive. And perhaps then some. If we can leverage, you know, those buyers, and yeah, it's great if we've got multiple buyers, but we also have to focus on the buyer, because it doesn't matter if we've got multiple. If we can't get the one that we want to see that maximum value, therein lies the issue. So you've got to present marketing as an investment that does two things. The first is, in the first instance, it protects value, and in the second, it leverages value potentially. So once you understand, and when does it do this? This is the most important thing, and we will be showing you this in more subsequent demonstrations that we run inside the listing presentation. But marketing actually plays its role not in advertising. That's its most significant role, and this is why an owner should invest in it. It plays its vital role at the point of sale. It plays its vital role at the point that the buyer is first introduced to the property. When they first see the property, when they first arrive for that first inspection, whether it be by way of a welcome home and open for inspection, or whether it be by way of you taking them there personally when they fall for it, it's at that point that we have to ensure that the value perception is at a maximum, because this is conducive to them seeing the maximum value, and whatever disposition they're in, we can maximize it to its extreme in terms of price. And I'm very succinct on how this is delivered. Yep. All right. So this is how we make sense of it. And this is how you now start to produce and get your numbers up. In the first instance, it is the first of the month. I absolutely implore you to sit down, which should have been done a few days ago, but sit down and write or list down all of the potential sellers that you found, an active property seller list. Now, I don't care if they've been indicated to you that it's, you know, several months off before they might be bringing the property on. If they've indicated that they do want to make a move, even though it has been prohibited by the advent of COVID and restrictions and all that sort of stuff, populate that list with as many as you can think of. And as I was just saying a moment ago, if you can come up with a list that numbers sort of 20 to 30, you're kind of in the box office for somewhere between 5 to 10 listings in the next few weeks. Why? Because the numbers don't lie. It's very simplistic. And we're coming out of those restrictions. But here's the thing. If you have been failing to engage, if you have not been having, as I just said to you a second ago, a minimum 5 conversations a day across that list of 20, 25, 30, whatever it might be, then you're probably going to find it a struggle to move into that space, because what you need to be doing, what the net effect of that constant communication and indeed those conversations have over you doing that in this, you know, the past 6 or 8 weeks, and it doesn't matter if you haven't been doing it, it's not too late, you have to do it right now, is you have not been forging the relationship, and you have not been developing a degree of confidence in your professional capacity for them to start sharing with you, first of all, the motive, and you haven't been in that empathetic disposition of them feeling like your disposition is one of care, because you are focused on what they're trying to do, but you are instead, you've been more or less focused on, are you ready to go? And then focused on only the listing presentation. So these are the things that you need to do. First up, create that list, which I just shared with you. Once you've got that list in place, then move into making sure where they, well, actually, here's the first one. Get that list. Now, you might have an idea of where they're going, but list it down. Just head up a little column, motive, and see, test yourself how much you know about their motive. And once you start to have conversations, see how much more you can find out, and see how if you direct during the conversation the subject matter to that motive, to the property that they're in, and to the client themselves and their interests, watch how that relationship starts to develop, because you could then find yourself getting the question of them asking for advice. And this is where the change comes in, and you'll find that everything's going to work well. Now, you also need to be very conversant with your property seller's research guide and or a pre-list kit or whatever else that you're putting out there, and making sure that everything you are doing and saying is consistent with the product that you promised to give them. Now, you will feel that this is a fair bit of work, but mark my words, if you've got 25, 30, maybe 40 names on that list, it's all going to come to fruition, provided you make sure that you're engaging and giving them this service and keeping those conversations up. And that you've connected passively with a lot of these things that we just talked about a few moments ago. And now all we have to do is then look at some of the buyers and the buyers you've been talking to and see if you can't make some connection of seller to buyer and buyer to property, and then also send that information, or at least engage in conversation around specific buyers that you have in place to make that work. And in preparation, this is the major thing that a sales professional ought to be doing. In your presentation, and this is something I made very clear to our guys over that I was running some training on in New Zealand this morning. First and foremost, yes, we want to make sure that our listing presentation is platformed around satisfying the motive and is motive centric. Secondly, you want to make sure that your listing presentation is not one that talks at people. Now, the problem with a presentation where you're just presenting, and I don't even like the term presenting, I think it should be called a listing education, is that if you find yourself in a role where you are presenting and talking at someone, much like I'm doing now, the person at the other end can choose not to listen. However, if you're running a listing education, and this is one where you're engaging people, asking rhetorical questions that lead people to a certain conclusion, they are forced in the first instance to listen. And again, if you don't know where I'm coming from with this, you need to actually call me, and I'll start to school you and coach you on developing a presentation that is largely one that engages the seller and teaches them lots around what needs to happen. You need to make sure, again, I'll say that I know that I'm drumming on about this, that presentation is also congruent with the property seller's research guide that you got out there. So make sure that when you get to price, it's not one of these things where you start giving them a quote on what you think the property's worth. You have to pipe up and say, well, as we said to you earlier on, price or comparative value is subjective. It's just a matter of opinion. Now, if you're struggling with this about the difference between price to CMA and the difference between a CMA and market value, right after we finish here, which you can jump onto almost immediately, if you jump onto Mark Dwyer on YouTube, and you'll see that we've got one that's premiering right now. The title of this particular presentation is Priceless, and it talks to you about price and how the whole role of it is totally misinterpreted in the business of selling property. In that half hour, 40 minutes, I think is well worth your investment to listen to over and over and over again, because this can enable you or empower you to put together a presentation that is centric to the client's needs, rather than one that just delivers on selling a property and harps on about price. Can I tell you that over the years, the number of times I've actually come across a seller where agents keep banging on about high price, and the seller will just turn around and say to me, look, we just want to sell our property for a fair price. We don't want to rip anyone off. We don't want more than it's actually worth. Now, that's a fascinating subject. Now, when they tell me the number, it does sound a little ambitious anyway, but you need to look at it from their perspective and the way they see it. People do deem themselves to be relatively fair, and they're not in the business of wanting to actually rip someone off for their property. Their greatest fear is getting less than the property's worth. This is something else I've just made a mental note that I'll be sharing on the show next week or the week after, to explain to you all of the things that are important to property sellers when you do go down and engage them inside that presentation. The next thing that you need to get in order is your understanding of marketing. So I'll just continue on with what I said before. Marketing plays its role not so much in locating the buyer, but maximizing their perception of value at the point that they engage the property. So you need to be able to explain what marketing is. The shortcut to that is by and large about creating perceptions, when it plays its most vital role, and this is in leveraging and protecting value the moment that the buyer sees it, and how it does that. It does that by creating a perception whereby the property looks, at the very minimum, its absolute best, but quite often in many ways better than it is. And believe you me, sellers want a better perception of their property. So you need to know, and then you need to know how to explain how to get sellers to invest in marketing. Get rid of that horrid acronym of VPA. Don't ever let that vendor paid advertising ideal ever pass your lips. If you, as a marketer, if you totally understand the concept of marketing and how it works, it's easy to sell, because your belief pattern around that in talking to a prospective seller is one that represents value, and they can see how it can be used as a leveraging tool. Now, before you sit there and say, but don't all agents have these things available to them? Yes, they do. But most agents don't understand marketing's role. They only see it one-dimensionally as advertising. You want to be the consummate professional, become a property marketer and understand how you actually derive that position. And then last but by no means least, be ready in a proactive manner to understand the disposition on how agents are remunerated, that we actually earn a fee, we don't charge one, that we are constantly adding value, that we don't get paid until a seller approves of what they get. So basically, we have to earn their approval in order to earn the fee. So this just makes perfect sense when you're actually setting the incentive, which is the fee that you are agreeing to at the beginning or at the listing presentation, that it has to be one that is conducive to you being incentivized correctly, and for them to then be the arbiter going forward. This will be the subject matter of what we talk about in our next encounter next week. I hope that you've enjoyed this. I hope you get that list together, practically speaking. You start engaging all of those active property sellers and understand that whilst it's very good to be hunting down more opportunities, work correctly with the ones that you currently have, improve your conversion percentages, and you can look forward to building your market share progressively, but importantly, more permanently. My name is Mark Dwyer. You can contact me at mark.salestrainer.com.au, or you can phone me on +61 410 592 165. I look forward to catching up with you next week.